Silent Rider lifted a collapsing nurse at the coach depot. Seconds later, the snow burst. Cold light, iron air. Rowan Hale moved first. Bright morning at Lantern Ridge Coach Depot, drifted boards, frost on the hitch rail, bells thin as glass from a team up the lane. A young woman tipped at the porch step, wool apron crooked, breath thin, knees folded. Rowan closed the gap in 3 long strides, one hand to her elbow, the other bracing the small of her back. Weight gathered before the fall finished. The snow shelf on the depot roof let go with a crack. A white curtain slammed down on the spot where she had stood. Powder leapt, boards boomed, the sign chain sang. People on the far stoop shouted. Rowan pivoted shoulders wide, pulled her clear of the slide, set boots into the packed track. She blinked hard and tried to speak. Nothing came. Face pale, lips chapped, green eyes fighting the spin. Canvas satchel hung from a strap across the chest, red cross stitched in clean thread. Scarf soaked at the edges. A freight sled bawled around the bend, mules spooked by the roof roar. Skids screeched, load high with kegs and flour. The driver saw too late. Rowan swung her to the lee of the water trough and flagged low with an open palm. The team veered. Not enough. He dropped to one knee, drew the Colt only to bark a warning into snowpack, muzzle down, sound sharp and safe. Mules jolted, missed the trough by inches, sled sliding past, sacks spilling but no harm done. The street exhaled as a group. Daylight held clean. No one bled. The woman steadied a breath and found a voice at last. Clara Wynne, the nurse from Clearwater Station, bound for a clinic south at Valley Ford. 22, sturdy in frame under the grey wool, more will than weight. She muttered apology for causing a scene and tried to stand straight. Legs wobbled. Rowan eased her to the bench beneath the awning where snow could not reach. Gloves off. He checked pulse at the wrist, warm enough to be saved. Canteen uncorked, one measured sip, then another. Not much talk from him, only clear tasks. Scarf from his neck over her shoulders. The crowd thinned. Bells faded. Wind scratched at the depot corners. The satchel caught a glance. Leather, old but cared for. A sealed envelope rode inside under muslin roll, county wax still unbroken. Clara set a hand over it without thinking. Rowan logged that fact and left it alone. A messenger from the coach office leaned out and barked that the noon stage had turned back at split draw. Drift above axle, no passage till crews cut away. Depot master offered a pallet by the stove for travelers, but eyes kept drifting to the satchel on Clara's lap and the red stitch on her apron. She thanked him. Chose outside air instead. Rowan studied cloud build over North Rim. Light glitter on each flake warned of change. The roof slide had been a whisper of what sat higher. The ridge held deep cornice. One hard gust and the main street would be a chute. He weighed distance to his line cabin tucked under basalt above the creek. 1 mile by the timber spur, half that if they cut across the beaver meadow and hugged the bluff. Clara drew a steadier breath. Fingers still trembled. No fever yet, only shock and hunger. He split a biscuit from his pocket, handed half, broke the rest into the trough for the grey horse waiting tethered. The animal snorted steam and nuzzled the nurse's sleeve. Small warmth moved between them, boots clacked behind. 3 ranch hands in dust coats, sleet on their brims, stepped out from the saloon porch. The tallest Vic Danner from the copper claim watched the satchel too long. A slow smile shaped under a frost-rimmed mustache. Rough talk drifted about shortages at the mine clinic, a shipment gone missing between the junction and here, morphine and laudanum locked under county seal. Danner's gaze made a point of the red cross on Clara's apron. Rowan set his hat brim a shade lower. No challenge, just the kind of stillness that draws lines in fresh snow. The wind freshened. Loose powder hissed across plank and rut. Rowan decided before the street did. He rose, offered an elbow. Clara took it. They walked at an even pace past the livery, past the empty smithy, onto the spur that edged the bluff. No hurry seen by others, but every step economical, time shaved off by choosing dry patches under cottonwood trunks. The grey horse followed without rope, tack-old but oiled hooves sure on ice. The town shrank behind to a square of brown walls and white roofs halfway up the spur. Noise rolled like distant thunder, though sky held no storm. Not thunder, cornice. The high drift across Lantern Ridge cracked again. A long white brow sheared away and dropped in slow motion until it wasn't slow at all. Rowan pulled Clara to the lee of a rock spine and covered her head with his coat sleeve. Powder billowed over them. Cold breath, soft blows, then quiet. When the cloud settled, the path they had just walked lay buried to the fence rails. They reached the timberline shoulder to shoulder. Speech came easier when trees cut the wind. Clara confessed a skipped breakfast at dawn, a night nursing a fevered child at the way station, no sleep worth counting. Rowan nodded once. Not scold, just the near math of heat and work. He gave the last of the biscuit and a sliver of dried apple, then turned his attention to the creek below. Ice shelf carried the kind of sheen that means strength for feet, but weakness for weight. Safe for two if careful, not safe for a horse. He looped the grey to a juniper and rubbed the neck until ears relaxed. A raven flapped low, black on white, then angled away toward town. Voices followed on the wind, not friendly. Danner and two more had taken to the spur as well. Sure bootsteps, talk about the county seal and how a stray nurse might trade mail for coin. The men were not law. They wore greed like badges and moved with the confidence of those who had often gone unchallenged. Rowan guided Clara down a cleft toward the creek. Snow set there in waves, knee-deep, pine tips dusted, no track visible. Balance slow. Each placement counted. A slip would mean a slide to the ice. Clara kept grit. The satchel stayed tight across her chest, strap biting the shoulder. Once she faltered on a buried branch and a short sound escaped, more anger at the stumble than pain. Rowan steadied with a palm at her forearm and a nod that said more than words at the creek bed. A narrow bridge of frozen spray curled under a small fall. The cave behind the veil could shelter two from eyes above. He tested with his weight, then theirs. Safe for now. They eased behind the ice curtain, breath hanging like thin smoke. Light came through blue and clean. Sound outside blurred. Inside the world reduced to drip and pulse. Clara swallowed and gathered breath again. Voice low. The envelope in the satchel held supply vouchers signed by a county medic who had turned his coat for money. She was taking them under order to the circuit judge at Valley Ford, where a fairer ear might sit. The vouchers proved the mine clinic had been starved on purpose while the claim owners pocketed federal allotments. If rumor traveled faster than coach wheels, men like Danner would love to tear that paper before it reached the bench. Rowan listened without change in face. New information adjusted old lines and suggested a route more layered than a simple escort. Not words. A done choice. Get her through. Keep the paper whole. Avoid ground that gives men with numbers easy angles above the creek. Bootsteps passed. One pair halted near the juniper. A coarse chuckle at the grey horse's saddle and the fine hand that cared for it. A voice wondered if the owner had walked into the ice and would not walk out. A second voice called for a search below. A third proposed a shortcut with a rope. None carried a rope. Wind carried their cold laughter down the rocks. Rowan marked the cadence of each step, the weight, which boots dragged, which favored a knee. Habits become maps. He loosened one glove, pressed the back of his hand to the ice behind them to read vibration and direction. Tiny tremors told a story. Two men moved upstream, one stayed above. They would circle and box the creek bend. Time had a short waist here. He unclipped the satchel strap from Clara's shoulder and retied it crosswise tighter. Fingers worked quick and sure so the bag would not swing at a jump. Scarf tucked in, cloak pinned at the throat with a wooden match sliver, skirt hem rolled and tied with twine to free her steps. All motions done with the clean respect, due a professional and an equal. No blush work. No waste. They left the ice cave by a slot behind the fall and climbed a seam of basalt little wider than a hand. Boots found purchase where lichen made tiny shelves. Breath kept low and steady. Snow dust fell in faint threads and vanished before landing. Once on the shelf, they edged along a ledge straight into a stand of fur that hid them from eyes above. The creek hissed under ice below, the sound of a saw blade far off. A jay screamed. Not warning to them, warning to its own kind, because a hawk cut the light high. The noise also pinned Dana's crew in place for a beat while they searched for the source. Rowan used that beat to cross the open patch between firs at a small crouch. Not a run that would leave a story in the snow. They reached a notch where his line cabin sat under an outcrop like a hat brim. Stacked rounds of pine, bark still on, moss faulted between. A tin chimney listed slightly and puffed honest smoke. Rowan had banked the fire at dawn. The door hinge murmured when pushed. Inside smelled of wood smoke, leather, and a faint ghost of coffee boiled hard. Light off the snow outside made the single window bright. No gloom anywhere. Clara eased onto a chair by the hearth and warmed hands over a shallow blaze, cheeks colored again. From a peg, Rowan took a coarse blanket and a dry shawl, then set a kettle to sing. Biscuits from a tin, jerked venison trimmed of the hard fat, a crock of stewed beans thick as paste. Simple fuel, perfect math. He set the Colt on a shelf, cylinder open, empty chambers visible. Policies written in muscle and habit kept muzzles down and hands calm. He passed her the tin cup. Breath steadied again. She ate like a person who finally trusts food. To stay silent in the cabin never felt empty. Tools rested exactly where a hand reaches without looking. A small shelf held stitched pamphlets on field care, a hymnal with dog ears, and a slim journal bound in cowhide without name on the cover. A riverstone sat on top as weight. On the wall hung a worn army coat, buttons dulled, no insignia left. Under it, a simple pine cross cut by a knife and tied with cotton cord. Not a shrine, only a ledger of days. Clara's eyes read the room, then returned to Rowan. Questions formed but stayed behind her teeth. Work first. She pulled spare linen from the satchel and cleaned a cut at her own knuckle where the bench nail had bit. Rowan tied it with a neat strip and a square knot that would never slip. The act looked like muscle memory from places no one likes to name. Wind gathered at the eaves. The ridge carried a second crack, farther off, heavier. The town bell tolled twice, not for worship, for crews to fetch shovels and saw. Dana's crew voices drifted faint but present, now below the cabin somewhere near the meadow. Method shifted. They were not prowling blind. They were herding the creekways, cutting off exits to Valley Ford. Rowan sketched a quick map with a charred stick on the table plank. Lines for ridge and creek, a cross for the depot, a square for the cabin, then a dotted route past a fallen cottonwood where ice never fully closed. From there a draw ran west to a rope bridge older than any man left in the valley. The bridge seldom bore weight in winter. The rails iced, the planks spaced mean. A careful crossing for two, light steps, hands on the side rope, eyes on the far post. Not an option for mounted men without nerve or sense. Clara watched and nodded. Mind bright in the glow, questions efficient. What about the grey? Rowan would lead the horse along the rim after dark to the lower pasture where it knew shelter. But not tonight. Hooves on crust talk loud. People with bad ears can hear a horse shout wind. He tightened the straps on a small pack, wrapped the vouchers in oiled cloth, and slid them against Clara's ribs under the shawl where body heat would keep the seal dry. 2 canteens, one for mouth, one to warm hands. A short coil of hemp rope, steel cleats for boot soles. 3 wooden pegs. A candle in a tin. Flint, 1 folded blanket cut long. All period and plain. Nothing shiny that would call a rifle eye. The door shook once under a knuckle. Not a smash, the kind of tap that looks for weakness. Rowan didn't move to answer. A second tap, Then a voice thin with politeness asked after the gentleman who owned the grey horse with the fine shoes. Said the county was missing property, and honest men were checking sheds for thieves. The word honest hit the door like a lie. Rowan motioned to the far wall. A crawl space waited behind stacked wood where a child might hide and a desperate adult might squeeze. Not for today. Hiding seedies terrain. Better to hold a quiet posture and waste an intruder's nerve. He set the chair near the door, sat, and said in a steady tone that a sick traveler rested and would not be disturbed. The voice outside changed shape, softer and more venom behind the silk. The tap turned to a push. Rowan stood and lifted the bar into place. Wood settled with a sure sound. Footsteps crunched away, then stopped. A boot scuffed just under the window. A small mirror flashed and was gone. Someone took a look inside to count shadows. Patience measured thin Clara's eyes met Rowan's. No speech needed. Plan moved forward by mutual nod. They doused the visible fire to coals, let the smoke thin, banked the kettle off to the side. Cloaks on, hoods up, satchel tight. Rowan opened the back hatch cut years ago into the crawl for air, barely large enough for a body. Outside, fir boughs drooped and made a screen. Snow dusted his hat brim as he slid through and reached to help Clara after. 2 minutes bought with the pretense at the door ran out. The latch at the front clicked. Then Wood groaned. Someone leaned a shoulder, and a quiet curse followed when the bar held. A knife tip ticked against the grain as a man considered carving out his own key. A second voice told him to save the effort and use the smoke hole instead. Boots climbed. The roof took weight. Ash slid. A hand reached for the chimney edge. Rowan and Clara ghosted down the back slope, one slow step at a time, keeping a pine between them and the cabin. The creek spoke up again, louder now where the wind fell away. The sky remained bright, snow sparkling like ground glass. Everything could be seen. Nothing hid. That was good. Daylight is honest. Bad men prefer corners. The draw to the old bridge waited ahead. Snow lay smooth, no track crossing it in days. The ash-white plank span hung between two basalt teeth over a narrow cut. Water black in the slot moved under ice like muscle. The rails were rope gone stiff with cold, spaced just right for a careful hand behind them. The chimney gave a cough as a boot hit it wrong. A man swore. Soot spilled down onto the hearth, smudging the neat room. A second man laughed and told the first to bring kindling to smoke the badger from its hole. Clever enough, smoke would crawl the hatch and make the back slope unpleasant. Time tightened. Rowan set cleats on his boots with 4 quick turns of a screw, then snapped a pair onto Clara's soles. Showed the hold on the rope, palm forward, thumb wrapped, eyes on the far post. Words few. Balance does the rest. She nodded, jaw set. Breath fogged once, twice, then steadied. They stepped onto the first plank together, weight soft, steps placed over the knots, not the gaps. Rope thrumming under glove halfway across a gust came through the cut and tried to peel them from the span. Knees bent, hips low, arms loose. The bridge swayed and then settled. A shard of ice broke loose and skipped across the black water, ticking like a watch. Behind, voices hit the rim, surprise at the sight of the old crossing, contempt at the idea of using it, a bet offered on whether the pair would fall. A rifle lifted for a scare shot. Danner barked, "No. The echo here goes wild. Hit the rope and their bodies do the rest." Nobody wants that on a badge they do not have on the far side. Rowan guided Clara into the shelter of a stone lip, and then into a run of scrub oak that curled along the ridge. Not a run. A gliding walk that made no story in the snow. Once screened, they watched the bridge from shadow. The men on the near side argued in cold voices about risk and reward. None stepped out. Greed has limits when the drop is close and witnesses thin. Smoke trickled from the cabin chimney and then stopped. The men would read that and think the occupants panicked and fled. They would be right about the second half, not about the first. Panic lacks math. This move had a ledger. Rowan led the route along the scrub bank to a sunlit patch under a south face where snow thinned. Time to warm hands, breathe, and count. Clara's color had returned and a line of steel had settled behind the eyes. Fear present? Yes, but leashed. A professional who had held children through fever does not break easy over cold, and men with loud voices. He passed a small tin of salve to ease windburn at her cheeks. Cloak collar adjusted, pack strap shortened, water small and regular. The day still bright enough to make distance before dusk, but light would drop hard behind the ridge in an hour. Valley Ford lay a long walk south over a frozen ford and then along Cottonwood Flats. With men at their back and a case in her satchel that could ruin a mine owner, the straight line would not hold long. They would need the long way a far shot cracked above town. Only a warning in the air to start crews moving deep drifts. Not aimed at anyone. Sound stitched cliff to cliff and came to them tired. The ridge answered with a soft rumble as another cornice slumped somewhere out of sight. The country itself warned that speed punishes fools today. Rowan turned their course toward a hidden bench known to few, a slant of grass kept clear by wind curls where elk bedded in fall. There a narrow chimney cut could be climbed hand over hand to a high shelf that ran all the way to the South Fork. Anyone following would be reduced to ants below with no angle for a shot. The play would cost energy and leave calves burning. The gain would be sightlines and choice. They reached the base of the chimney. Stone cold and dry holds good if chosen right. Rowan went first, then guided foot placements by tapping rock with a gloved knuckle. Clara climbed after, breathing measured, skirts tied, satchel tight against ribs. Twice a toe searched for a hold and found it after a second try. No panic, no noise. At the rim she lay flat and let lungs catch up, then smiled without softness. The kind of smile that belongs to people who finish climbs and do not ask for medals from the high shelf. Lantern Ridge spread in clean maps. The depot sat small. Danner's men like pepper flakes on white. The line cabin a dot. The old bridge a thin scratch. The South Fork cut a black line through the flats toward Valley Ford. Beyond, low hills soft as blankets and a brighter band of sky promised wind without teeth. Rowan gave a short nod. Plan confirmed. They began the traverse, boots whispering on gritty stone, wind at backs, daylight honest. The vouchers rode against Clara's ribs, safe and warm. Behind, the cold little men tried to read tracks that did not exist and cursed the bridge for being older than their nerve. Midway along the shelf, a rock the size of a helmet shifted under Rowan's weight and clattered down into the gulch. The sound carried far. A hawk launched from a snag and swung out over the void. The movement drew three figures to the rim far behind. One pointed, another shook a head. Danner shaded eyes and stared a long time, then smiled like a man who enjoys long games. He turned his crew away from the bridge and began a slow angle toward the South Fork, crossing where all routes eventually meet. Clara caught that smile from distance, though she could not see the eyes. Understanding passed between fugitives and hunter without words. The chase would not stop at dusk. Tomorrow would open with a new try at the crossing. That was the kind of pressure that sharpens or breaks. Rowan marked a notch ahead, where the shelf pinched into a boulder choke. Beyond it, the way widened and dropped by a gentle ramp to a patch of willow where a spring kept a hole open year-round. There they could drink and eat and plan the last leg to the South Fork while the sky held. The shelf to the notch narrowed to the width of a boot and a hand. Not a place to rush. A place to breathe and trust edges. They took it one slow pace at a time. Wind hissed past the ear like a saw at work. Snow dust lifted and fell. Once Clara's cloak brushed rock and a scatter of crystals flashed, then vanished. Not a slip. A kiss. At the notch, the stone caught a gust and sighed. Then came stillness. The ramp beyond opened like a mercy. They reached the willows as the sun leaned west, light gone, honey pale and shadows long and thin. Water asked for hands and gave back cold and clarity. Bread and dried meat did their work. Rowan cleaned a scuff on Clara's glove with a thumb, as if removing a shadow. She looked at that small care and knew it meant the distance between strangers had closed a notch as well. Voices came from ahead down in the flats. Not Dana's crew. Wagoners cutting a road through drift with shovels and curses, honest sound, tired rhythm. The path to Valley Ford would open by morning. Good news for townsfolk. Bad for two people who needed to reach a judge before a mine foreman reached them. Rowan set the cup down. Choice now, not later. The straight road would be watched. The river under the cottonwoods held another path, slick and slow, with a fallen cedar bridging a narrow place. Choose the water and risk a slip. Choose the road and meet men with clean hands and dirty plans. Snow flurried again, small bright sparks in the last light. They turned toward the cottonwoods and the fallen cedar, and the South Fork's black run. Turning point fixed, no way back to the cabin, no safe bed at the depot. Only forward along the river spine with vouchers warm against a brave heart and a hunter smiling somewhere behind the drifts. The river path took them under cottonwoods, trunks glazed, bark whispering. The fallen cedar lay across the South Fork like a narrow spine. Water slid black beneath, fast and cold, ice lips snapping at the current. Rowan tested the first step, cleats biting. Clara cinched the satchel high against ribs, one palm to the ropey bark, eyes fixed on the far bank. Wind pressed hard in the cut. Each pace counted. Halfway the cedar groaned. Frost popped. A thin sheet of ice at the upstream edge broke loose and banged the trunk. Clara's boots skidded an inch, jaw locked, weight low, breath steady. Rowan reached with a forearm at her back, not a grab, a brace, and they finished the passage in silence. Tracks pressed the snow on the far side. 3 men had moved through not long ago and cut toward the ford where wagons crossed to Valley Ford. Dana liked straight places where numbers matter. The ford would be his fence they kept to willow shadow. A dray rolled somewhere ahead, voices telling snow to move. Sunlight stayed bright, every risk clean. The country held no mercy and no lies. First glimpse of the ford came through a veil of reeds. Water ran shallow over stones freed of ice by hooves and wheels. A low crowd had gathered on the valley side where the wagoners worked. Town faces, women with baskets, 2 boys with a shovel between them. On the near bank, 3 riders waited like stains on the snow. Vic Danner in the middle, coat better than his soul, hand resting light on a holster strap. The others watched the path from cedar to ford and grinned at what must come. Rowan read the angles. No cover in the open. Cross and they close. Stay and they circle. One choice left that did not end with iron at a temple. Make the ford loud and public and turn a hunt into a crowd matter. They stepped out where everyone could see. Clara's hood came down so the red cross on the apron spoke first. Murmurs rolled across the water, the kind that pull elders to porches. A greybeard at the far bank lifted a hand for quiet. Dana's smile widened. The tone carried oil, said an apology would solve a problem if a certain parcel changed hands before it caused harm to honest business. Eyes never touched Clara's face, only the satchel line under the cloak. The word honest again bent under its own weight. Rowan set feet shoulder wide and raised an open palm so all could read the posture. No threat, safe frame, voice low and level, the kind that drifts and still lands. The lady travels under county charge. Anyone with business can meet the judge. Dana laughed and shifted his horse 2 steps into the shallows. The men flanked and did the same, water slapping leather. One lifted a rifle a hand's width, not aimed, a signal for nerve. The crowd drew breath. Barn doors creaked. A woman near the wagoners called for the marshal. Clara moved first, not back, forward. Boots into the ford, water to the ankle, cold climbing the seam of her skirt. Chin high. The satchel strap creaked. Eyes locked on the opposite shore where town stood watching. The sound of the river filled the gap where fear usually lives. Dana's horse tossed. The man's grin thinned. He barked for the men to seize the parcel and be quick. Rifles lifted higher. Rowan put his body half a step ahead of Clara and angled his hat brim to kill glare. Colt came free, slow and clean, muzzle canted to rock and water. One warning into the gravel at the edge, splash and dust and a sharp crack that ricocheted off the far mill wall. The report said no more than this line holds the horse to Dana's right, spooked, danced sideways, kicked spray at its rider. The man swore and grabbed leather with both hands. A boy on the far bank whooped before a mother's hand closed on his sleeve. The marshal finally arrived at a trot, coat unbuttoned, badge dull, shotgun broken open over a forearm. Not a show, a presence. The marshal called names he knew and told the riders the road was public and the ford a square. Words came with the ease of a man who has kept tempers from boiling over for 20 winters. Dana put honey in his voice and talked of theft and danger to commerce. The crowd listened without warmth. Clara stood still in the flow with water-numbing boot tops and waited for the man with the badge to make the call. Choice hung a long beat. Then the marshal looked to the apron's red cross and the nurse's steady set and made a decision that would read honest 20 years from now. He pointed to the town side and invited the travelers across under his watch. Any man who crowded them would answer to the bench before sundown. Dana spat into the ford and smiled again, smaller. The smile said later. The smile said alleys. But numbers are different when daylight and neighbors watch. The riders edged back a yard to let the river lead. Rowan holstered, hand open again. The town exhaled, crossing felt like walking a thin edge between seasons. Water cold and glassy, sunlight warm on eyes. Rowan held the rope line and kept body between Clara and the horses. At midstream, Dana jerked his reins and pushed a step like a feint. Rowan matched the move with nothing but angle and presence, and the line held. Warning only. Boots hit the far stones. Hands reached from wagoners to lift Clara to dry ground. A woman wrapped a shawl from her own shoulders around the nurse and scolded the wind. The marshal took position at the head of the street. Short nod to Rowan, then to the riders, then to the judge's office door open wide. Valley Ford looked like any winter town caught in bright truth. Raw boards, neat piles of cordwood, a bell rope with frost, a storefront window reflecting sky. People formed a half ring with room to pass. Rowan and Clara walked through it without hurry inside the office. The circuit judge sat thin and calm, sleeves rolled, spectacles low. The vouchers came out of the oiled cloth and landed on the desk with county wax whole. The judge read fast, eyes narrowing, then flicked a glance at the marshal. 2 brief orders followed. Send for the clerk at the mine clinic. Hold Vic Danner and both riders as material men until an inquiry sits. The marshal did not argue. Daylight makes certain work easy. Voices rose outside as the warrants hit the cold air. Danner tried one last run at charm, then hardness, then mockery. None stuck. The crowd's weight shifted against him, slow and heavy as a thaw. The riders let hands rise a shade too high, and the marshal's partner slid in neat as thread with iron cuffs that clicked without spectacle. A single warning shot from Danner into the air would have spoiled the square and risked a fall. He kept pride in his teeth and chose silence instead. Clara swayed once the heat came back to feet and fingers. Rowan steadied a forearm and guided to the bench by the window where sun warmed a slice of floor. Someone brought broth. Someone else found a clean towel and a dry pair of wool socks from a basket kept for travelers. The judge signed a sealed order for immediate release of supplies to the mine clinic and set a day for testimony. No speeches. No papers read aloud. Work done and done under law while winter watched late light pulled gold across the yard. Snow drifted slow and harmless. The worst wind moved off the ridge. Townsfolk trickled away to chores. The marshal hauled the riders to a holding shed and tied the door with plain rope. Dana stared through the slats at the square and imagined he still held the board. The board had changed hands. She stepped outside into clean air and looked toward the cottonwoods and the river path that had nearly taken her. Eyes bright but dry. Relief did not make her small. It made her tall. Rowan joined at the top of the steps, hat in both hands for once instead of over his eyes. The town faded to a soft hum behind them. No music, no crowd, no curtain. Just bright day, hard ground, and two people who had crossed the line together. Clara moved a half-pace closer, and the space between ended. Arms around shoulders and waist, careful of the satchel now empty of fear. Breath cloud met breath cloud and dissolved. The picture that stays in a town's mind formed and set. The ridge wore a thin crown of light. A bell rang once for evening. The grey horse from the high rim would be led down by a boy who loved animals and wanted to help. The clinic would open its doors to the mine crew before full dark. A clean ledger where a dirty one had been, and if a story needs closing words, let them be simple. Winter tests steel and finds what will not break. Kindness can move quietly and still carry more weight than loud hands. A crowd can be a wall when truth stands in front of it. Some rescues start at a depot and end in a square, and all the miles in between matter. Love begins in the smallest steady decisions and grows brave in daylight. Subscribe to the Wild Frontier Tales and send your opinion about this heartbeat story, so you never miss another tale from West Frontier.